So what we have to do now is we have to add some code over here which would allow us to create that authorization environment. Okay, so let's go about doing that. So now what we did earlier is we authenticated the user, saying that if they provide the username and password, and if the username and password are correct, then we are at this point where we have to do something. As I mentioned earlier in the previous video, we have to create, what happens is whenever a user is working and authenticated, we have a session, like even irrespective of whether you are, whenever you are interacting with the server, there is a session already there by default. Okay, so you need to make sure that this session is there and you're using that session. So whenever you're working with sessions in any page, in any PHP backend page, if you're working with session, the first line of code, now remember, this will be the first line of code. There should be no code before it, otherwise this line of code will not work. So this is a basic requirement. So the first line of code on your page, without any spaces, without any comments before it, it should be session underscore start. So any page, we'll see that later on, but any page you are working with a session, you should have this as the first line in your code. So once you have this session start, now the session has started. Like whenever the user is on this page, a session has started and some session variables are recorded. Now one of the session variable that we are interested in is currently the session ID. So whenever there is a session created between the client and the server, they have a unique ID between those sessions. So this session is a unique ID. The log of this session is kept as a record inside the server, and then this session ID is sent back to the browser, and the browser saves this information as a cookie. Okay, so we will see all of these things, but just in the beginning we have to start with the session start function. So once we do that, we want to get the ID of the function because we want to use this as our access token or authorization code. Okay, so let's get that. So I'm gonna open this as auth code. I created a new variable, and then I'm going to store this session ID over here. So there is a function in PHP called session ID. This session ID function will return the ID of the current session, which is the log that is saved at the server. So whenever you are interacting with the server, a session is created. So because you have asked it to create a session, and you are monitoring that session. So this session ID is now generated, and then you can receive this by using the function called session ID. Now once you have received this is the session ID, right? So once when you have a session, you can create your own session variables. Now why do people do that? Now session variables are a good way to keep track of who's using this session, right? The username or the user preferences, not the password, because you should not hold sensitive information as session variables. So it is always better to keep track of those information that you might need down the road later on to do something with it. Okay, because session variables can be accessed by any PHP page without sending them the data. Previously, if you remember, we want to send the data from one page to the other page. We were using the get query. We were saying question mark and the key equal to the value, and then we were saying and we add more key and value pairs. So we were actually doing that in the URL. Now with sessions, you don't have to do that. So any variable that is created in one session can be accessible by any page using that session. So if you created one here, it will be accessible by the other one. So in our case, we want to keep record of who the user is for this session. We already have the user ID, which is verified. So we can use that information. Again, never store the password. Okay, so we can get the user ID. So how do we create this? Now session variables are an associative array. So that means they have key and value pairs. So what is the name of this array? It's called $_session. Now you remember we used a similar format in post or get arrays. or files. So it's the same thing that is PHP reserved words. So this is the name of the session associative array where you can store the session variables. And each variable, as I told you, it's an associative array. So it should have a format like this. So you specify the key inside the bracket, and then you say equal to, and you can specify the value here. So in this case, our case, we are storing the user ID, and the user ID is over here, which is the $UID. Okay, so again, you can store anything you like. User preferences, their language. You remember that, for example, if you're using a language, the user may change the language in one page. So, but how does the browser remember that in the next page that you go to, the other pages connected to the user's login page are all in the same language, because you change the preference only on one page. So they store these preferences inside this session variable. So now I've created the session variable and I have stored user ID. For my case, I'm using user ID. Why? Because there is a reason why we are trying to store the user ID. Okay. Now, the next thing that I have to do is I have the session ID now. This session ID, I have to remember it. Okay. So how do I remember it? Because I have to store it in a place where I can use it to connect it and verify if this user is using this session. Okay, I don't want to store it in the session itself because it's open. So anyone can spoof saying that I created a session variable, and if you get hold of your session ID, then I can say, okay, I am the session, I am this person, right? So what I will do, which is a good mechanism, database tokens mechanism. So let's go to our browser, and this is our table, and this is our user table. If you remember, when we were creating the table, we had an empty column called access token. Now this doesn't have anything right now, because when we created the user account, we just added the user ID and password. So this place will be the location where we store the session ID code for the user. And when he logs off, it will be deleted. And when he logs in again with the new session, it will again be created again. Okay, so let's do that. So how do we do that? It's like simple query. We did this like update query because the user is already there, so we cannot use insert query. So let's create the query. Let's say auth query. And this way I'm going to say update user set what is the name of the column? Set access token. Access token is equal to, and then I'm going to store this auth code over here. Okay, so say $, and it is a number, but I think we made this as a varchar, right? Let's see this structure. Yeah, we call it a varchar, so we can store it as a varchar. So I have to store it as $auth code where, because we don't want to add this same one to every user in the table, right? So we have to add it for one user, which is this user, where UID is equal to, again, $UID. Okay, it's in quotation, single quotations, because this is a string, varchar. Similarly, auth code is also stored as a string. And the session ID, the session ID I think contains, letters and numbers. We'll see that as we add it. Okay, so we added the auth query, and now we have to execute it. So result is MySQLi underscore query $con and $auth underscore query. Okay, this will execute it, and once it is executed, that means I have created my authentication code and everything. And if the result is positive, that means everything was done successfully, I can simply go ahead and go to the logged in page. Okay, if something bad happened, that means I can show that there was an error. I'm not going to do that now, but you can do that, if there is an error with updating. Maybe here I'm assuming there will not be error because you already checked the username and password exist in the database. So unless and until there is a network connection issue there, but it is always good to have a plan of how to fix it later on. So you can have an else statement here and do something like show an error saying 500 server function did not execute, please try again, something like that. It's always good to have graceful errors in your code. So this way I have now received the session ID, which I'm working with, and then I created my own session variable and I stored the user ID inside it, and then I created a query where I updated the user's entry inside the user table, and I added the current session inside that table, and then I ran the query. And if the query ran successfully, that means it executed. Now I don't want to use result because you have already result over here, so let's better change this to res or something like that. You can make more meaningful names just to avoid any issues. Now, and then once we do that, I use the header function as before to go to the CP admin page, which I want to be secure. Currently it's not secure, so I have to go to the CP admin page and exit. Otherwise, I have the error flag set, and I go down, and whenever the error flag is set, I show them the username was incorrect and the password was incorrect. Okay, so let's save this now. So let's save this and see if it's working. Like if it's able to create a session, get the session ID, and store it inside the database. Okay, so let's go to our page. Let's go to our home page. Let's refresh this page, and I'm going to go to the login page from here. And the username is admin, and the password is 1234. And let's click on login. That means it is now created. So let's go to the database and refresh our database. You can see now that the session ID was created, and this is the session ID. Now this session ID is something that will be exchanged between the server and the client. Now how is it exchanged? I'll show it to you. Let's see if it is. So see, I'm on this page. So this page should have the session ID in a cookie, because you remember in the last small description I gave you that whenever the session is created and the log is created with the ID, and this data is sent back to the browser, and the browser stores this information as a cookie. Now, whenever a new page is requested, here in this case is the CP admin page, the browser has to send this session ID to this page. Okay, let's go ahead and inspect the element. And here I'm going to go to the network tab, and I'm going to go to the CP admin page. Let's go to the headers. Okay, it's not there because I didn't record it properly. Not sure why. It should be there, but let's find it out. Okay. Usually it should be there. Yeah, it's here now. I think it was not recorded. So if you go down over here, you can see that. You can see, where is it? Okay, let's go to cookies section. See, so the cookie is created. There is a cookie that is created. This is on the one. This is, I think, from old one, but let's forget that. So we have this cookie called. We have this cookie, and the name of the cookie is PHP session ID, and you can see that this value that you're seeing over here is exactly the same value that is actually stored inside my database. So this unique session ID is only for this user. So whenever any page is sent back from this, whenever the session is started, this session ID is sent back between the server and the client. You don't have to send it manually. It is automatically done. So this cookie is automatically created on your browser, and this cookie has this session ID, and it is exchanged between the server and the client. Okay. So what do we have to do now? Now this page, as I mentioned, this is not authorized, or this is not safe page right now, because anyone can access it. Even if I'm not logged in, I can access this page. Okay. So what we need to do now is we need to make this page secure. We need to secure this page. So, but before we do that, let's go a step to see that whether we need authentication or not. So I'm going to go ahead and create. Let's close this page because you already got the idea, right? Because it's stored in PHP session ID. We can come back to this. Let's save this for later, and then we can come back to that. So I'm going to go back and to my coding environment, and I'm going to create a new file, and this time I'm going to name that file as my logout.php. So this page is going to include okay, placing. Okay, so this page is going to include my script when I press the logout button. So if you go back to this page, you can see that there is a logout button, right? So if I click this link, it should log me off. Now what does log off mean? You remember that we created a session, and we want to now remove that session and want to delete the session access token from the database. So this is our job right now. So in the logout, let's start the logout page. Sorry. So let's start the logout page. and let me add the data to here. So if you remember, the first thing that we need to do whenever we are working with sessions is we want to say session start. Any page that you're working with sessions should have session start, doesn't matter. And then I'm also going to use ob start because I'm going to use the header function later on. So now let's go back over here. So what do we do when we want to log off? The first thing we want to do when we log off is we want to remove the session data. We created a variable, right? Session variable. So I want to remove this session variable. And I also want to remove the access token. Now how do I remove the access token? I have to use the update query again, but this time I have to set it to blank. So we can say that, for example, dollar del query. We use the same query, update user set access underscore token equal to this blank, because I don't want to store any value inside it, and then say where UID is equal to something, right? I have to get the UID from somewhere. Let's say $UID, but I don't have $UID right now. Now if you remember where I can get $UID from, because in the previous page, in the logging page, we already had $UID from the form, but in this page we don't have it. Try to recall that I told you that whenever we create a session variable, that session variable is accessible from anywhere. Okay, so that means I can actually simply go over here and say $UID is equals to $_session of UID. Okay, so in the previous page I was actually creating that session variable like this, and this time I just made it opposite. So now I'm getting the value of the session variable. So this variable is a variable everywhere until the session is active. Once you delete the session, this variable is gone. Okay, so we are going to delete the session here to make it gone. Okay, so let's create this UID over here, and now what I am going to do is I got the UID and I'm going to run the query to update it to make it blank, and then I will run it. So MySQLi underscore query con dollar del query, and then if the query ran successfully, if result, then I have to do something here. Like I have to remove, now it's already cleared, right? So it's already cleared. I want to delete this this session UID. So to do that, we use a function called unset. Unset will use $_session UID. So it will remove this variable, the value of this session variable. Okay, and once we remove that, we use another function called session underscore destroy. Now what this function does is it will destroy the session. So I will not keep track of the session anymore, right? And then once you destroy it, you want to go back to the home page so that the user can log in later on. Right? So we use the header function, header, and say location, index.php. This is our home page, and we exit. Now if something else, that means the query did not execute properly or something else happened, we can mention over here, 504, 500 error or something like that. But this should work. So whenever it is, the session will be deleted, the access token will be empty, the session variable will be removed, will be unset, and the session will be destroyed. And that's it. Okay, so let's see if it's working. So let's go back to our page this time, refresh the page. The logon button is already connected, because if you go to the footer page, which is it? The footer page, yes, it's already logout.php. So the file name is already there. So I can go back to this page now. I can simply select logout. Okay, it does go to blank page, which is the logout page itself. So that means we made a small mistake. Let's see if it's working here. Yeah, no, it's not working. So yeah, we have OB start, we have session start. So the header should work, right? We did the same thing like this. So I'm going to copy this. I don't know what mistake I did. I tried to make sure that I'm not doing that. Okay, so let's go back to our page. Back, refresh, say logout. Well, still not sure. It looks okay to me. I don't know why it's not executing the token. Access token is still here. So the header function, not the header function. I think it's something over here. So session ID is there. So let's just debug it a little while and see if it's working or not. Okay. So I'm going to say var dump $_session and then say exit, and then go back to our page and say refresh this page. It says admin and UID. Yes, it looks good. So that means the session is there. Maybe the del query is not executing. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Let's see. Del query is update user set. I have the same query, right? Let's take the same query over here, and I'm going to paste it. I don't know why it's. I'm going to paste it over here, and this time I'm going to just remove the access code and make it empty, right? Where UID is $UID, and then should be okay now. And then if the result is true, so del query, come on. Ah, sorry, yeah, the silly mistake. I did not include my db config. Wow, because it didn't connect to the database at all, so that's why it's dying. Okay, it should be okay now. So I'm going to go back to my page, refresh the page, and this time I'm going to press log out. Okay, it goes back here. Let's refresh this page. Now you can see the access token is removed. Now once the access token is removed and we go back to the home page, we have removed the session. Hopefully the session will also be removed from here. The cookies, you cannot remove the cookies. Okay, the session will still be the same one stored inside the cookie until we change it, because cookies are in the browser. So we can use Ajax to remove those cookies, delete the cookie and these things. But that's you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so we deleted the session. So now currently I should not. So by logic, I should not be able to go at the top over here and press cp admin.php, but it still goes there because I haven't modified this page, right? Because this page is currently must be secure. This page and the add item, delete item, update item, all the pages that are only supposed to be accessed by the admin must be secured. So what we just did was the first step. The first step in authorization is to create the authorized ID to keep track of the user across the pages, which we did just now. So whenever you log in successfully after authentication, this part is authentication. So once authenticated successfully, this part over here is creating the authorization identity. So you are getting the session ID and storing the session ID in the database, and then informing the user, and then going to the page and saying, yeah, now you are inside the secure zone. But this secure zone is actually not secure because I did not secure it. So let's open that page, the CP admin page. Now inside this page, what I need to do at the top over here is to secure it. So how do we do that? So this is the second part. So usually authorization has two parts. Whenever we want to implement authorization, it has two parts. The first part is creating the authorization identity, which you want to carry out across the pages. And then in all these pages, any page that is secure, you have to repeat this. Okay, so we'll try to make something which we can repeat. So I'm going to go to the top part of this page because I will copy this in every page that is going to be secure. Okay, so we'll go to the top part of the page over here. We'll do the first thing that we did for everyone. We have to session start, because I told you that it doesn't work. In this page, if I'm not using header functions in this page, so I don't need ob start, but it is always safe to do that. Okay, because in other pages you might use it, because we want to just copy this code in every secure page. And then the next part is I also want to include the database, right? So include. Why do we need the database? Again, you remember we stored the access token. So I have to check whether the request that is coming has the same access code as what is stored inside the database for that user. Otherwise, there is an issue. That means someone else is trying to get into my system. Okay, so I say include and access, db config.php. Okay, and then the next things that I have to do over here is, suppose I'm done with all of these things, right? So the first thing I have to do is I should ensure some code which is only run when the session is active, right? So we created a session variable, if you remember. So if we say if is set $_session of UID. So if this is set, then I want to execute the code, because I don't want to execute it otherwise. Because every page we have to make sure that the session is already there. So that means the session is there. If the session UID is not there, is not set, because you remember when we were logging out, we were unsetting the session. So if it is not there, then what do we have to do? That means you are in the wrong location. So I'm going to say header. We are using header, so good thinking, right? Location. I want to tell him, please go back to you are not supposed to be here. You can add a page, saying that restricted, access restricted, go back to the home page. Or you can just simply let him say, okay, please go back to the home page and exit. So what will happen is, if there is no session created and there is no session variable, then I would tell him to please go back. That means in my record, I don't have your user ID as logged in. Correct? This is what we want to do. Now suppose the session was there. Suppose we did not unset the session and the session was there. Now the first step that we have to do in this case is we have to get the user ID, right? The one that we stored here. So let's say user ID and then say $_session and then say UID. Okay. Now we need the session ID. Now I don't need a session ID with the session ID function, because that will be true. That will get me the current session ID. But I want to get the session ID that I stored inside the database and compare it with the cookie value, because this cookie is already sent from the browser. So the browser sent me the cookie already. Okay. So I want to compare it with that. So how do I compare it with that? I have to first get my access token from my database. So how do I do that? Again, run a query, select query this time, right? So we'll say $query is equal to, since we are going to copy this in different locations, I'm not going to call it $query, because I think we in the insert, add item, delete item pages, we use the word query. So it's always better to name it uniquely. So I'm going to say, make it like verify. Okay, verify. Verify would be select access token from user where UID is equal to $UID. So I want to get the access token for this user that I stored inside the database, and I'm going to run it. Result MySQLi underscore query and say $const $verify, and then once I run the query, I will get some value, right? Now I have to check whether this value, you can say number of rows equal to 1. That means I should get some value, otherwise there is an issue. So I will do this. If $res, if MySQLi underscore fetch underscore, we'll not use fetch, we'll use num rows. Remember, we use this in the login function. So if the num rows of $res is equal to 1, that means I received something. I got one column, because there is a user. There is a user with this user ID. Otherwise, I mean, there is some issue, right? Otherwise, I have to go back to the header index page, right? So I can just simply do that. Otherwise, do the same thing. If you don't want to repeat, you can actually set a flag and then at the end go to this code, which is unique, because we are going to do this again one more time. But for now, it's fine. It's good to have a better coding style. Now, once we had this, once we know that the number of rows returned was equal to 1, we want to get the value of the access token. This could be done by using fetch, because if you remember, select query doesn't return the value. It will return the pointer. So to get the row would be MySQLi underscore fetch underscore assoc of $res. So now I got the row. Okay. Again, row might be used later on as well, so I'm gonna remove that. So R. Okay. So now I got the row, and from this I want to get the access token. So for us it will, let's call it auth code is equal to, because it's an associative array, access underscore token. So it will receive this access token from the database. Now once I receive this access token from the database, the next step that I would like to do is compare it with the session from the cookie, right? So how do I do that? So we say if $auth underscore code. Now I'm not going to say equal, because if it's equal then I can go to the remaining part of the page, right? So I'll say if it's not equal. If it is equal, then fine, that's it, go ahead, execute the remaining part of the page. But if it's not equal to this auth code, if it is not equal to which code? From the cookie. So how do I get the value of the cookie? We use the same thing, $underscore cookie. So if you remember, we get the session from session and cookie from cookie. And what is the key value? If you remember, if you go back to this part, this is the cookie value. This is the name of the key of the cookie. So we'll just paste it over here. So it's PHP sesh ID. So this is the place where the cookie, the value of the session ID is stored inside the cookie of the browser that is sent in the next subsequent request to this page. And I compare it with the code that is stored inside my database. And if they are not equal, then I have to say, okay, sorry, you are in the wrong place. Please go back to the index page. Otherwise, you can continue with the remaining part of the page. So I'm going to say, I'm going to remove this title. Why? Because I'm going to put this over here to make it cleaner, and then, oh sorry, maybe. So this part of the code, if you see this part of the code, is the part where I'm just checking whether the user is logged in. That means the session is there, and the the session variable UID is there, and it has a value which is equal to the user ID. If it is there, then I have to first check whether this user is the same user using the same session. Otherwise, some people manipulate it and saying that, okay, I'm this user, but he may not be that user. So I have to check it in my own database whether this user ID has this access token inside the database. Okay, so I go back, I run the query, get the access token from the database. Now once I receive this access token from the database, I compare it with the access token which is sent by the browser. And how is it sent? Inside the cookie. Now I take it out by using the $underscore cookie function, and then I compare it. If they are not equal, I say, okay, bye-bye, you are not in the wrong place. But if they are equal, I say, okay, go ahead, go to the page. Now you have all the right to access the page. Now this part of the code is the same part that I'm just going to copy this part and go to all the secure pages that we have. Okay, so I can go to cpadmin. Cpadmin is already done, so I say add item page, the add item page, and I'm going to go to the top of this page again over here and then paste it. Since I'm using dbconfig already, I can simply just delete this. Okay, I don't need this anymore. And then I can save this page as well, save the cpadmin page, and then I can do this with the delete item page as well at the top part of the page. And every page that I'm doing, I can remove the dbconfig because I've already included dbconfig here, right? And then I can also do this with the modify item page. And then I can go back, I can remove the OB start because I already have it, and I can remove this one as well. And then I also have to do with the update item page, right? So I have to go here, put this over here, and then I can do the same thing, which is remove the dbconfig because I already have it right now. I will save this page now. Okay, so these are my secure pages. If you remember the picture from the previous slide, I have this picture where I said these are the secure pages, which is the add item page, update item, modify item, delete item. These are all the pages that should not be accessed by anyone. So now let's go back. Let's see if I'm I'm not logged in right now, right? So let's go back to this page, and this time I'm going to go to my home page, and I will try to do the same thing, which is I will try to go to cpadmin. See, it doesn't go there. I can try to go, let's say for example, I can still go back to my page and say, okay, let's go to add item page. It will not go to that. So all these pages are now secure. They will not allow you anyone to access these pages, even if you remember the URL. So they will not allow you to enter unless and until you log in. So let's go back and try to log in. Say admin 1, 2, 3, 4. Say login. Now I'm logged in. So now I can access this page. Now I can go to add item page. Okay. Now I can go back. I can modify item page. I can click on any item. I say update. It can go to this page. So this is called authorization. Now these pages were supposed to be restricted zones which can only be accessed by the server. And once I go and press log out, it should be logged out. Now again, if I go back to the top of my page and now again I try to go to say delete item page, it will not go to that pages. So any page that is now under that part of the code that we added, you remember this part of the code that we added, this part of the code is ensuring that unauthorized users should not be allowed to go inside. That's it. This is what we are trying to do. So this is authorization. Now, authorization is a bit longer than authentication, but authentication was just simply comparing the username and password, right? Now, this way we can ensure that all my resources are safe and only authorized people will be able to access them. Okay, and you can go back and check your database and see, okay, I see the access token is removed. So each time the user logs in, the access token is created. Each time I'm logged in, the access token is created, and this session ID will be now saved. You can observe something that this session ID is actually the same every time, right? You can actually do something like there is a function in PHP. I'm not going to do that, but I'm just telling you how to do that. Before you actually do the session ID, you can actually simply go ahead. There's a function in PHP called session.regenerate ID. This way, what happens is you can actually regenerate the ID. So not the same ID as the previous one, because you're using the same computer from the same connection. So it will reuse the same session ID every time you log in. Okay, so you can actually regenerate, or you can actually create your own session ID. You don't have to rely on the auto-generated session ID. You can create your own session ID. But let's keep this as it is. Okay, but you got the idea that how authorization is important and how authorization is done. There might be one suggestion of what you can do. Let's say, for example, you see in the home page over here, if you go bottom, you can see login and logout both are available, right? Now, when I'm logged in, I should not see login, but when I'm logged out, I should see login, right? So how can you do that? It's very simple, as we just see this. Let's see how it can be done, right? If you go to this page, and this is the logout page, sorry, we have to go to the footer page. So I'm going to open the footer page. Where is my footer page? Here, right? So if I go to my footer page, I can see that these two buttons over here, right? These two items over here. Now what you can do over here is you can add a conditional statement. Say if is set. So if you go to this page over here and say if is set, this is a PHP code, right? PHP code. If, you can say not of is set $_session of UID, right? If this is not set, what you can do is you can show the user login, and then you can simply go ahead and say else, and I'm going to close the bracket first, and then say else. If this is not there, then you can go ahead and do this. And let's go back to our page, refresh this page. You can see that I can see logout. If I press logout button, it will now show login button only. Okay, that's it for now. Best of luck.